Welcome back to part 2 of our introduction to the carbon offset project cycle. In part 1, we went deep on the first 6 stages of our reference cycle. In part 2, we complete the journey covering implementation, verification, issuance, and transfer, and what determines whether a credit and the claim built on it is genuinely credible. Let's start, as we did in part 1, with the whole picture. Still a simplified reference cycle, not a strict rulebook. The project we've been following has already been through selection, both due diligence gates, program and methodology choice, PDD development, preparatory and financial work, validation and registration. Those first 6 stages shown grayed out below are done. Though remember, physical implementation may already have started well before this point. Today we complete the final 4: implementation, verification, issuance, and transfer. And importantly, we'll also look at what happens after transfer, because that's where a credit's use and claims integrity are actually decided. On part 1, we ended at registration. To move to the verification phase of the SILE, the project must be already operating for some time to, supported by a monitoring program, provide the evidence to be verified that it adhered to the methodology and has a given volume of legitimate carbon credits earned. From whatever point implementation is actually happening, the project construction and operation must closely follow what was described in the PDD and stay within the boundaries of the chosen methodology. This is also where the monitoring systems set out in the PDD are put into practice, generating the evidence trail that verification will later depend on. Monitoring itself looks quite different depending on the project type, and the frequencies here are illustrative, not fixed. The actual requirement is set by the specific methodology and the monitoring plan. Continuous metering is common for energy generation. Remote sensing is central to forestry projects. Field sampling supplements that with ground truth measurements. Household surveys track actual cookstove usage, and increasingly, developers are layering in continuous digital MRV, IoT sensors, and automated remote sensing pipelines that stream data throughout the monitoring period rather than relying solely on periodic manual surveys. Done well, this can meaningfully shorten verification lead times because much of the evidence is already assembled and quality checked before the formal monitoring report is even compiled. A few factors are particularly important in keeping implementation aligned with the methodology. Consistent, disciplined monitoring and data collection is essential. The project must apply the exact calculation approach the methodology specifies. Any deviation needs to be documented and reported rather than quietly absorbed. Good record keeping matters enormously because verifiers will ask for exactly this kind of evidence. And ongoing stakeholder engagement, including a credible and live grievance mechanism, needs to continue throughout. Before verification itself, there's a step that's easy to skip over: the formal monitoring report. The sequence runs from the monitoring period to a monitoring report the developer compiles and submits to the verification entity that will review of that report. It is common to receive from the verifier corrective action requests, which, if satisfactorily completed, underpin a final verification opinion. That monitoring report is the actual bridge between raw operational data and an independently verified claim. Once that monitoring report has been submitted, verification proper begins. Verification is carried out by an independent, accredited body. It's worth being specific here, whether the same third-party entity can act first as a validator and later a verified for the same project. That is accepted by many programs and major standards, including Vera and Gold Standard. Go further and enforce strict rotation rules, or mandatory breaks after a set number of consecutive verification periods, specifically to protect independence over the life of a long-running project. In effect, if validation asked, "Is this project design credible?" verification asks, "Did this project actually deliver what it promised?" The result is a gross verified reduction figure, not yet the number of credits issued. In practice, verifiers check several things. They check data quality and completeness and correct application of the methodology's calculations. Whether continued additionality and eligibility need to be reassessed at every verification depends on the specific program and methodology. They check compliance with the monitoring plan and review how stakeholder grievances during the period were handled. A few findings come up repeatedly, though these are possible outcomes, not guaranteed remedies. Monitoring data gaps may lead to conservative defaults, an excluded period, or a corrective action request. Baseline drift is resolved according to whatever the registered project description and applicable methodology actually specify. Incomplete stakeholder records typically require a grievance log and evidence of resolution before the verifier will sign off. And 2 more worth flagging. Leakage is sometimes underestimated, where displaced activity outside the project boundary isn't fully captured, which usually means a recalculation that reduces net credits. And equipment or calibration issues, meters or sensors that don't meet the required standard. typically require recalibration evidence or a conservative discount on the affected data. None of these are unusual, but together they explain most of the delay that happens at this stage. It's worth drawing out a few practical lessons from how these findings actually play out, because the same patterns separate a smooth verification from a drawn-out one. First, document everything in real time. Verifiers work from records, not memory, and retrospective reconstruction rarely holds up to scrutiny. Second, align monitoring to the methodology early. Catching a mismatch during implementation is far cheaper than discovering it at verification, when the affected period may already be locked in. Third, engage the verifier before the site visit. Flagging known issues in advance genuinely reduces surprises and often shortens the whole process. And fourth, budget real time for corrective actions. In practice, verification timelines usually slip because of the back and forth resolving corrective actions, not because of the site visit itself. None of this is complicated, but it's exactly the discipline that separates projects that sail through verification from those that don't. With a positive verification report, the project can apply for issuance. And this is a good moment to be precise about a common overstatement. Issuance is not simply one credit per verified ton. Net credits issued are typically the gross verified figure, reduced by uncertainty deductions, leakage deductions, buffer contributions, and any program share of proceeds deductions. Each net credit gets a unique serial number, and that serialization prevents duplicate issuance within the registry's own system, though it alone doesn't prevent double claiming across disconnected systems. It helps to see this as three distinct numbers, not one. Gross claimed reductions are what the monitoring report initially puts forward. Verified reductions are that figure after the VVB's independent check, and net credits issued are the verified figure after deductions. The gap between the first and last number can be substantial, and it's important as a developer to understand what will be your net issuance, as that is what is converted into cash flow and returned to the investment. To receive credits, the project proponent needs an appropriate issuance or holding arrangement with the registry. Buyers are a bit more flexible than is sometimes assumed. Many hold a direct account, but others use custodians or intermediaries instead. For many nature-based projects, a portion of new credits is withheld into a shared buffer pool, sized according to risk factors like fire history and financial viability. You'll sometimes see a range like 10 to 60% quoted for forestry buffer contributions. Treat that as illustrative only, since it varies by program and project. Here's exactly what happens when a reversal occurs, because the buffer pool doesn't automatically absorb every loss. Programs generally distinguish between an unavoidable reversal, a wildfire or natural disaster genuinely outside the proponent's control, which is typically covered by the buffer pool up to its available balance, and an avoidable reversal, linked to the proponent's own action or inaction, such as illegal logging that could reasonably have been prevented, where the proponent may carry direct liability. And critically, if losses exceed what the buffer pool actually holds, the consequences are program-specific, but can include a requirement to replace credits, or in serious cases, suspension of the project's account. The final stage is transfer. The registry records a change in account holdings and unit status, an important record, but not automatically the same thing as a transfer of legal title, which also depends on the underlying contracts and applicable law. Public visibility varies too. Account holder identity and prices aren't necessarily public, even where serial numbers and retirement status typically are. And whether retirement generates a formal certificate depends on the specific registry or service provider. Once a buyer receives credits, the three options, hold, resell, or retire, mean quite different things. Holding isn't just speculation. It can support planned compliance or portfolio management. Reselling moves credits on, for instance via a broker, and retiring permanently removes a credit from circulation. One important detail is that retirement is necessary for most credible offsetting claims, but it is not sufficient on its own. Credit quality, claimant eligibility, claim wording, and applicable claims codes all matter too. This brings us to a discussion on the credibility of the carbon credit you have been issued. After all that effort, does it represent a real reduction, avoidance, or removal of a ton of CO2 equivalent? There has been concerns in the past that the project cycle, however long and subject to checks and balances, had flaws and led to overissuance of credits or issuance of credits to projects that should not have received them. In response to that, the voluntary carbon industry developed two self-regulating bodies. The Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, or ICVCM, assesses carbon crediting programs and specific methodology categories against its core carbon principles, and where they pass, allows credits to carry the CCP label. Buyers increasingly pay a premium for, or exclusively seek, CCP-labeled supply. We have a course on ICVCM and the CCPs, and if you want more details on that, I would encourage to watch that course. The market also established the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative, or VCMI, sits on the demand side. Its claims code of practice sets out what a company actually needs to do in its own decarbonization effort and in its use of credits before making a credible public claim. A high-quality credit that meets neither framework may still struggle to find a buyer or may sell at a discount, which is exactly why designing toward this demand from the program and methodology stage onward is worth doing early rather than retrofitting later. In compliance markets, the same scrutiny is applied in different ways. For CORSIA, a group of registries and types of project is continuously reviewed and approved for each of its phases. For Article 6.4, the methodology is approved and the final issuance also go through a robust review process. All these efforts to ensure that a credit represents that it should. This closes our course on the carbon project development cycle. We hope the 9 key steps and the key decisions and considerations a developer needs to undertake are clear. If you found it useful, please consider sharing with colleagues that may benefit from our free, best-in-class carbon courses. Thank you, and see you next time.